The air in the Adrena clinic didn't smell clean, it smelled scoured. It was the scent of absence. No dust, no perfume, no human sweat. Just the sterile bite of antiseptic and the low, electric hum of aggressively filtered air. Bryony Lorne sat on a chair upholstered in white leatherette, so cold it felt damp against the back of her legs. Her fingers, chapped and red, worried the corner of a faded photograph. Her mother, Sigrid, squinting into a long-ago sun, her smile wide and real. A smile Bryony hadn't seen in years. Hope was a physical thing inside her chest, a painful, fluttering bird beating against her ribs. This clinic with its silent, gliding staff and walls that seemed to absorb all sound was the last one. The most expensive, the most exclusive. They didn't advertise. You found them through whispers, through the desperate back channels of online forums for families ravaged by prion diseases. They promised not a cure, but a genetic reset. The language was vague, proprietary, and cost more than the sale of her mother's house could ever cover. But they also had a donor program, a special one, for people with ancestral bloodlines. That's what the initial email had said. Bryony didn't know what it meant, but she had sent in her DNA sample without a second thought. And they called her back. A soft chime like a single, perfect drop of water echoed in the waiting room. The seamless white panel on the far wall slid open. A man in a lab coat, his name badge reading Dr. Leland Voss, offered a smile that didn't touch his eyes. They were pale gray, the color of a winter sky before a blizzard. "Ms. Lorne, we're ready for you now." His voice was as smooth and sterile as the room she was leaving. Bryony tucked the photograph into her worn jacket pocket. The worn paper, a warm, real talisman against the encroaching cold. The phlebotomy lab was a continuation of the clinic's oppressive sterility. Gleaming chrome, white counters, and machines that pulsed with soft blue light. The air here was even colder, carrying the sharp, clean scent of isopropyl alcohol. Dr. Voss gestured to a padded chair, his movements efficient and detached. As Bryony sat, the leatherette squeaked softly, the only. "Just a routine panel, Ms. Lorne," Voss said, his voice a low murmur meant to soothe, but it only scraped against her raw nerves. "We just need to confirm your unique markers are as robust as the initial sample suggested." He was preparing a needle when the door hissed open again. The man who entered didn't wear a lab coat. He wore a charcoal suit tailored with such precision it seemed sculpted to his frame. He was tall, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead, and his stillness was absolute. It was as if he'd absorbed the silence of the building and made it his own. The air shifted, growing heavy, charged. Dr. Voss paused, his hand hovering over the tray of sterile implements. "Dr. Crow," Voss said, his voice tight with a deference that bordered on fear. "King Ryland Crow, the founder, the genius, the man from the glossy online brochures." His eyes, the color of dark, aged brandy, found Bryony's. They didn't flicker with clinical assessment. They held a possessive, unnerving focus, like a collector appraising a priceless artifact. "The Lorne specimen," Crow said. His voice was a low baritone, laced with an accent Bryony couldn't place. "Old, perhaps. European. Lineage purity is remarkable. Traces of the Carpathian strain, recessive but present." "Proceed, Leland." The word specimen landed like a stone in her gut. She watched as Crow moved to a nearby terminal, his back to her. Yet she could feel his attention fixed on her as intensely as a physical touch. Voss, now visibly tense, swabbed her arm. The cold of the alcohol was a sharp shock. He was less gentle now, his movements jerky. The needle went in, a stinging pinch that made her gasp. Dark, rich blood, almost black in the unforgiving light, swirled into the vacuum-sealed vial. It seemed impossibly vibrant against the sterile white of the lab. Crow made a soft sound, a quiet hum of approval, without turning around. Another vial was filled, then a third. A sickening, draining sensation began to pull at her, a lethargy that felt deeper than a simple blood draw. It was as if he were taking more than just blood. He was taking her hope and leaving something cold and metallic in its place. Voss pressed a piece of cotton to the crook of her arm. "You can wait in the adjacent observation room," he said, his professional calm frayed at the edges. "It will only be a few minutes for the centrifuge and primary analysis." Bryony was led into a small, featureless room. A single chair, a table, a water dispenser. One wall was a large, dark pane of glass that mirrored her own pale, anxious face. A one-way mirror. The knowledge settled into the hollow space in her stomach. Why did she need to be observed? The air was stale, recycled, thick with the silence of a place that was never truly empty. She got a small paper cup of water, the liquid so cold it made her teeth ache. The condensation beaded on the cup, wetting her trembling fingers. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each one was a slow, agonizing drip. She could hear the faint, high-pitched whir of the centrifuge from the next room, the sound vibrating faintly through the floor. It was the sound of her own body being broken down, analyzed, judged. She thought of her mother, lying in that sterile bed in the state facility, her eyes vacant, her body a prison. The image, once a source of fuel for her hope, now felt like a premonition. The clinical perfection of this place was beginning to feel wrong. It wasn't the clean of a hospital. It was the clean of a slaughterhouse floor after it's been hosed down. There were no magazines, no calming pictures on the wall, no attempt at comfort. It wasn't a room for a patient. It was a holding cell. She walked to the mirrored wall, her reflection a ghostly twin. She pressed her fingertips against the cool, smooth surface. Could they see her? Was Ryland Crowe on the other side, his brandy-colored eyes dissecting her every nervous tick? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. She felt a primal instinct to run, to hammer on the door and demand to be let out, but she crushed it. This was for Sigrid. It had to be. This was the price. She just had to endure it. The low hum of the building's systems suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight that pushed in on her eardrums. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a sound, a deep, resonant clang that vibrated up through the soles of her shoes. It was the sound of a heavy bolt, magnetically sealed, slamming into place. Another followed, and another, echoing from down the hallway. A lockdown. Before the panic could fully crest, the main lights flickered and died, plunging the room into shadow. A moment later, emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a hellish, pulsing red. A low-frequency alarm began to thrum, a nauseating beat that matched the frantic hammering in her chest. Bryony scrambled for the door, her hands fumbling for the handle. It was smooth, cold, and utterly immovable. She threw her shoulder against it, the impact jarring her to the bone, but it was like hitting a wall of solid steel. "Hello," she screamed, her voice thin and reedy in the thrumming red gloom. "What's happening?" Her own ragged breathing was the only answer. Her eyes darted around the room, a caged animal seeking an escape. They landed on the mirror. The red emergency lights on her side had killed the reflection. The lab beyond was empty, but above it, set back from the glass, was a mezzanine, a control room, and standing there, bathed in the red glow, was the silhouetted figure of King Ryland Crowe. He wasn't rushing or shouting orders. He was perfectly still, looking down at her. A speaker crackled to life above her head, the sound sharp and painful. It was Voss's voice, stripped of all warmth, flat and clinical. "Subject is secure. The antigen cascade is positive. Unprecedented purity." His voice paused, and she could almost hear the dry smile in his next words. "Congratulations, Ms. Lorne. You are a universal donor. For our purposes." The red lights ceased their frantic strobing, settling into a steady, blood-hued wash. A deep, mechanical sigh echoed through the walls as the pressure in the room equalized. With a quiet hiss, the locks on the door disengaged. The sound was not one of release, but of permission. She was being let out. The thought didn't bring relief. It brought a colder, sharper fear. A cage door opening is not freedom when the entire zoo is the enclosure. Bryony didn't move for a second, her muscles locked, her mind screaming. Then the survival instinct took over, a primal command that bypassed thought. She wrenched the door open and plunged into the corridor. It was silent. The clatter of her sensible shoes on the polished linoleum was a profane intrusion. Every surface gleamed under the sterile white lights, a stark, clinical world that now felt alien and predatory. She passed a nurse, a young woman who had smiled at her that morning, who had offered her tea. The nurse's eyes met hers for a fleeting second, then darted away, fixed on a chart she wasn't reading. The woman's face was a mask of professional indifference, but Bryony saw the flicker of something else beneath it. Pity, or maybe just the discomfort of a witness who chooses not to see. She didn't run. Running was for prey. Running would trigger the chase. Instead, she walked, her stride stiff and unnatural, her shoulders tight enough to ache. She forced herself to breathe, a slow, deliberate inhale that did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird of her heart. The air still smelled of ozone and antiseptic, a scent that had once been reassuring, the smell of clean, of healing. Now was the smell of the abattoir, of the sterile instruments used for slaughter. The reception area was empty. Her coat was still on the hanger, her purse on the small side table where she'd left it. The mundane reality of the objects was jarring. She grabbed them, her fingers clumsy, the familiar weight of her purse a flimsy anchor in this new, terrifying reality. A security camera, a small black dome on the ceiling, whirred almost imperceptibly as it tracked her movement. They were watching. Crow was watching. He was letting her walk out the front door. This was the true horror. They weren't afraid of her escaping. They were confident. They knew exactly where she would go. They knew the one place she had to go. To her mother. The automatic glass doors slid open and the city air hit her. It was heavy with the damp chill of a coming storm, thick with the exhaust of buses and the smell of wet pavement. The sudden cacophony of traffic, of distant sirens, of 1,000 overlapping conversations, was a physical blow after the tomb-like silence of the clinic. For a moment, she was just another woman stepping onto a busy street in the late afternoon, the gray light of the sky pressing down on the concrete and steel. But the feeling of being watched clung to her like a second skin. She pulled her coat tighter, her head down, and blended into the river of pedestrians. Anonymous, just a face in the crowd. She walked for 2 blocks, then 3, not toward the bus stop that would take her home, but in the opposite direction, with no destination in mind other than away. Every time a car slowed beside her, the muscles in her back coiled. In a reflection of a dark shop window, she saw it, a black town car, sleek and anonymous, keeping pace 2 car lengths behind. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were toying with her, a predator enjoying the scent of fear from its quarry. The street was a trap. The open air was a cage. She needed to go to ground. Ahead, the tiled entrance to the subway beckoned, a dark mouth leading into the earth. An escape into a different kind of chaos, a labyrinth of tunnels and steel. She fumbled in her purse for her transit card, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She pushed through the turnstile, the metal bar cold and final against her hip, and descended the concrete steps. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of stale popcorn, damp earth, and the unique, metallic tang of the third rail. The roar of an arriving train was a physical vibration that traveled up through the soles of her shoes. She pushed her way onto the crowded car, just as the doors were closing, the pneumatic hiss sealing her in. Pressed between a man in a damp raincoat and a teenager with headphones blasting tinny music, she felt a flicker of safety in the anonymity. Here, she was just another body in the mass, invisible. She gripped a cold metal pole, her knuckles white, and watched the station lights smear into a blur as the train plunged into the blackness of the tunnel. The car swayed, a rhythmic, lurching motion. Her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, stared back at her from the dark glass of the window. The train slowed, its brakes screeching, and pulled into the next station. The doors hissed open. A tide of people pushed off, and another pushed on. Bryony shuffled deeper into the car. They won't stop. The voice was low, rough, and directly beside her ear. She flinched, turning her head sharply. A man was standing beside her, swaying with the train, his face half hidden by the collar of a worn tweed jacket. He looked exhausted. His eyes were shadowed with a fatigue. Ice flooded Bryony's veins. "Who are you?" He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the grimy floor. "My name is Torren Slade. I used to be his partner." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were a startlingly pale gray, filled with a terrible, ancient weariness. Before I understood what he was really creating, before I saw what he was willing to sacrifice for it. The train lurched, throwing her against him. He steadied her with a hand on her arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers cold. "You need to listen to me, Ms. Lorne. Every instinct you have right now is wrong. Don't go to the police. They can't help you. Don't go to your mother. That's the first place they'll be waiting. How do you know my name? What do you want? It's not just pure. It's original, archaic. What flows in your veins is a genetic ghost, the primal strain. Crow's been hunting for it for decades. The source code. He doesn't want to cure the condition his kind suffers from, the genetic degradation. You're not a donor, Ms. Lorne," Torren said, his pale eyes boring into hers. "You're a blueprint, and he needs you alive and terrified. The stress hormones, the adrenaline, it potentiates the reaction. He's conditioning you. He's marinating his prize." A wave of nausea washed over her. The press of bodies, the stale air, the lurching of the car. She felt faint. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You do the one thing he won't expect," Torren said. "You stop running." He pressed a small, heavy object into her hand. A burner phone, old and clunky. "And you become the trap." He also pushed a folded piece of paper in her palm. "Go to that address. Now. Don't look back. Get off at the next stop and lose yourself. I'll find you." The doors opened. "Go," he urged. Bryony stumbled out of the car, her legs unsteady. She didn't look back. She plunged into the crowd, moving on autopilot, the cold metal of the phone a talisman against the encroaching darkness. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the station, changing lines twice before emerging into a different part of the city, a neighborhood of warehouses and old brick tenements under a sky the color of a bruise. The address Torren had given her was a narrow door between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop with iron bars on the windows. There was no name, just appealing number 237. The air in the alley smelled of sour garbage and rain. She pushed the door. It was unlocked. The hallway inside was dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. A single bare bulb flickered overhead, illuminating a steep flight of stairs. She climbed, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The place felt abandoned, a forgotten corner of the city. At the top of the stairs was another door. She pushed it open and found Torren Slade waiting for her. The room was a makeshift laboratory. It was the antithesis of Crow's clinic. Old, mismatched tables were covered with scarred equipment, a centrifuge that looked like it belonged in a museum, beakers stained with the ghosts of old chemicals, a microscope with a brass body. The only modern piece of equipment was a small, medical-grade refrigerator, which hummed quietly in the corner. The place smelled of rubbing alcohol and something else, something coppery and organic. "You came," Torren said. It wasn't a question. He looked even more worn out under the harsh fluorescent light, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "You said I could stop him." Bryony's voice was steadier now. The shock was burning off, leaving a hard, cold residue of anger. "We can," he corrected. "But it requires a commitment from you that is unconventional." He walked over to the humming refrigerator and opened it. Inside, nestled among vials and petri dishes, were several sterile medical kits. He pulled out a tray containing a syringe, a tourniquet, and two small, glass vials filled with a clear liquid. Crow and his kind. They are parasites, elegant ones, but parasites nonetheless. Their entire biology is built around the consumption and processing of blood. He explained, his voice taking on a detached, academic tone, as if he were delivering a lecture. He placed the tray on a metal table with a soft click. Their systems are hyper-efficient, hypersensitive. We can use that. He picked up one of the vials, holding it up to the light. This is a custom synthesized anticoagulant cocktail, 1,000 times more potent than warfarin. It includes a bespoke enzyme inhibitor designed specifically to target their unique coagulopathy. He set it down and picked up the second vial. And this is the nasty part. It's a nerve agent precursor, inert in your bloodstream, harmless to you. But when it comes into contact with the enzymes in their saliva, the ones that numb their prey, it metabolizes, turns into a potent neurotoxin. Bryony stared at the vials, then at him. You want to poison my blood? I want to turn you from the cure into the disease, he said, his voice grim. He will come for you. Not his minions, not Voss. Crow himself. He's arrogant. He'll want to take the first sample himself. It's a ritual for him, a sacrament. Torren looked at her, his expression devoid of any comforting lies. When he bites you, this cocktail will enter his system. It won't kill him. Nothing so simple. But the anticoagulant will trigger a systemic hemorrhage. He'll be compromised, weakened. The neurotoxin will disorient him, slow his impossible reflexes. It will make him vulnerable. It will make him killable. The reality of his words settled over her. The poison chalice. She had to offer her own throat. Will it hurt? She asked, the childlike question sounding absurd in the grim little room. Yes, he said, without hesitation. It will be the worst pain you've ever felt, but it will give us the only chance we have. The only chance your mother has. Sigrid. The name was a fire in her chest. All of this was for her. It had always been for her. Bryony thought of her mother's face, pale and thin against the hospital pillows, the quiet dignity with which she faced her slow decline. Crow had offered a miracle and delivered a nightmare. He had used her love as a weapon against her. The anger hardened into resolve. It pushed the fear down, deep down. She was done being prey. She walked to the table and rolled up the sleeve of her left arm. Do it. Torren gave a single, sharp nod. He didn't waste time with reassurances. He worked with a grim efficiency, his hand steady. He swabbed her arm with an alcohol pad, the cold sting of prelude. He expertly found the vein in the crook of her elbow. The needle went in, a sharp, precise pain. She watched, detached, as he slowly depressed the plunger. She felt a strange coldness spreading up her arm, an icy tendril winding its way towards her heart. It was an unnatural sensation, a chemical chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. A faint, metallic taste bloomed on the back of her tongue. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, the edges of her vision going fuzzy. Breathe, Torren commanded, his voice sharp. Deep and slow. Your body is adjusting. Don't fight it. She obeyed, drawing in a ragged breath, then another. The dizziness subsided, but the feeling of wrongness remained. She could feel it, a subtle hum under her skin. She was different now. Tainted, weaponized. She was no longer just Bryony Lorne. She was a vessel for poison, a walking, breathing trap. Torren withdrew the needle and pressed a cotton ball against the puncture. It's done. The agents will be fully systemic within the hour. Now for the bait. He handed her the burner phone. We need to lead him somewhere we can control the environment. Somewhere with choke points. Somewhere he won't expect. He unrolled a faded blueprint on another table. It was the layout of an old hospital. St. Jude's Memorial. Decommissioned 8 years ago. Your father. He was treated there, wasn't he? Bryony felt a fresh chill. How did you know that? Crow's research is thorough, Torren said, tapping a section of the blueprint. He knows everything about you. Your mother, your father's long illness. He preys on emotional connections. We'll use it against him. You're going to send a message, not to me, not to anyone you know. You're going to send it to your mother's old, deactivated number. but she won't get it. No, but his surveillance software will. It scrapes everything connected to you. It'll flag it as an emotional anomaly, a cry for help. A frightened daughter retreating to a place of memory. He looked her in the eye. He'll see it as you breaking. He won't be able to resist. Bryony took the phone, her fingers feeling thick and clumsy. She typed the message, each word a carefully chosen lie built on a foundation of truth. Asterisk, Mom, I'm in trouble. I don't understand what's happening. I'm scared. I'm at St. Jude's, the old West Wing, where we used to wait for Dad. Please, asterisk, she hit send. The message vanished into the ether. A digital lure cast into the dark. Now we go, Torren said, already packing a small, heavy-looking bag. We have to be in place before he gets there. The drive to the abandoned hospital was silent. The city lights blurred past the windows, a world of oblivious people living normal lives. Bryony felt profoundly separate from them, as if she were already a ghost. The metallic taste in her mouth was stronger now, a constant reminder of the toxin she carried. St. Jude's loomed out of the darkness, a hulking Victorian monolith, its windows like vacant eyes. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but Torren knew a spot where the links were cut. They slipped through and crossed the overgrown grounds, the grass wet and slick underfoot. They entered through a service entrance, the door pried open long ago by vandals. The air inside was cold and dead, heavy with the smell of dust, mildew, and the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic that time had failed to erase. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally in the cavernous hallways. Beams from Torren's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and the ghosts of forgotten suffering. He led her to the West Wing, to the very waiting room she remembered from her childhood. The chairs were still there, bolted to the floor, their vinyl upholstery cracked and faded. She ran a hand over the dusty armrest of the chair she'd always sat in, a wave of grief and memory washing over her. "This is the lure," Torren whispered, his voice hushed in the oppressive silence. "But the trap is 2 floors up. The old surgical theater. One way in, one way out. We wait for him there." They climbed another set of stairs, the flashlight beam dancing over the decaying walls. The surgical theater was a chamber of horrors from a bygone era. A massive, multi-limbed operating lamp hung from the ceiling like a metal spider. The walls were tiled in a sickly green, and a tiered observation gallery loomed over the space. In the center of the room was a heavy, steel operating table. It felt like an altar. "Stay here. Stay quiet," Torren instructed. "He'll be drawn to the waiting room first, to the scent of your fear and memory. That will give me time to take my position." He slipped out of the room, melting back into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Bryony alone. Silence descended. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. Bryony stood in the center of the room, every nerve ending a light. She could hear the blood thrumming in her own ears, a slow, steady rhythm. The cocktail in her veins made her feel strangely cold, but her mind was incandescently alert. She waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only light came from a large, grimy window, where a full moon cast a sickly, pale light across the tiled floor. Then she heard it. It wasn't a footstep. It was a deep, resonant thump. It came from somewhere below her, echoing up through the building structure. It was slow, patient, powerful. Thump. A pause. Thump. It wasn't the sound of a human heartbeat. It was the sound of something ancient and utterly confident. He was in the building. He was hunting. Her hand went to the burner phone in her pocket. She pulled it out, her thumb hovering over the screen. No signal. A small, chilling icon in the corner of the screen confirmed it. They were being jammed. They were cut off. She was alone. The thumping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was an active, listening silence. A predator holding its breath. She held hers, too, straining to hear, her own heart a frantic, trapped thing in her chest. The air grew heavy, cold. a soft, metallic scrape from directly above her. Bryony's head snapped up. In the ceiling, a large, metal ventilation grate was set into the plaster. As she watched, a fine, gray dust sifted down from its edges, catching the moonlight like malevolent snow. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, the deliberate sound of screws being turned from the other side. He wasn't coming through the door. Her eyes darted around the room, frantic. The door Torren had left through, the vent above, and the window. 2 stories up, its glass thick and reinforced with wire mesh. No escape there. Her gaze fell on a heavy, stainless steel instrument tray resting on its stand near the operating table. A single, loud pop echoed in the theater as the last screw on the vent gave way. The grate shifted, hanging crookedly by one corner. Absolute darkness lay beyond it. Then came a new sound, the slow, viscous, deliberate sound of a single, heavy drop hitting the tiled floor directly beneath the vent. Splat. The black, viscous liquid spread from the impact point, an obscene parody of a bloodstain on the sterile white tile. It didn't soak in. It pulsed, a tiny, living slick of darkness. Another drop followed, identical in its slow, deliberate descent. Splat. Bryony's breath hitched, trapped in her throat. The warped metal of the vent grate groaned, then swung down on its last hinge with a shriek of tortured metal, hanging open like a jaw. From the absolute blackness of the ductwork, something began to uncoil. It was not a man climbing down. It was a fluid descent, a cascade of shadow that poured itself from the ceiling to the floor. It resolved into the shape of a man without the clumsiness of gravity, landing with a soft, predatory silence that was more terrifying than a crash. King Ryland Crow stood beneath the vent, his form absorbing the weak moonlight, making the shadows around him seem deeper. He was dressed in the severe, tailored lines of a surgeon's suit, but the fabric seemed to drink the light. He smoothed the cuff, a gesture of such mundane calm, it was utterly insane. Bryony's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. Her hand, slick with sweat, gripped the cold steel of the instrument tray. He took a step towards her, his movements economical, unnaturally smooth. The air chilled around him, the scent of antiseptic and something older, like cold stone from a deep cellar, filling her nostrils. "You have something that belongs to me," he continued, his eyes, dark and depthless, fixed on her. They held no malice, only a profound, possessive hunger that was far worse. A unique genetic sequence. A key. My key. He was close now. Too close. She could see the faint, almost imperceptible web of veins just beneath his pale skin, darker than they should be. She could see the utter lack of life in his gaze, a focus as absolute and unfeeling as a microscope lens. "Your mother." Sigrid. She was a remarkable woman, a pioneer, but she was sentimental. She saw a gift and called it a curse. She tried to hide it, dilute it, erase it. Imagine trying to erase perfection. The name, Sigrid struck Bryony like a physical blow, a cold spike of grief and rage. He spoke of her mother as if she were a lab specimen, a failed experiment. The grip on the instrument tray tightened until her knuckles were white. Her gaze flickered past him, scanning, desperately searching. Her eyes caught on it. A small, gray plastic panel on the wall by the door. Wires fed into it from the ceiling. A single, illuminated green button in its center. The control for the heavy, blast-proof window shutters. Dawn couldn't be far off. It was a chance. A suicidal, impossible chance. "I have spent decades," Ryland murmured, advancing another step, purifying the bloodline, removing the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities. What flows in your veins is the culmination of that work. The final, untainted strain. Strong, potent, permanent. In her pocket, her fingers brushed against the hard plastic of the 2 syrettes Torren had pressed into her hand. Warfarin concentrate, potassium chloride, blood thinners, and heart stoppers. A death sentence for a normal human. For one of them, a poison of unimaginable agony. Torren's last, desperate gambit. Asterisk, it has to get into his system, Bryony. Directly. Asterisk, an idea, cold and sharp as a scalpel, cut through her terror. A thought so monstrous it almost made her gasp. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't fight him. But her blood, he wanted her blood. Ryland smiled then, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. It's time to come home. He moved. It wasn't a lunge or a run. It was a blurring of the space between them. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was on her, his presence a wall of absolute cold. The instrument tray she tried to swing felt like a child's toy. He caught the steel stand with one hand, his grip not straining, but simply absolute. The metal groaned, bending in his grasp as he wrenched it from her. The tray crashed to the floor, scattering scalpels and clamps and forceps with a deafening clatter. His other hand shot out, seizing her arm. The cold was shocking, a deep, cellular cold that felt like it was leaching the warmth from her bones. It was a grip of impossible strength, each finger a steel clamp. He pulled her towards him effortlessly. The clinical, cellar smell of him was overwhelming. Her mind screamed, a high, thin wail of pure animal panic. She fought, twisting, kicking, her fists beating against a chest that felt like carved marble. It was useless. He lowered his head towards her neck, his breath a cold whisper against her skin. Don't fight it, he murmured, his voice a vibration against her throat. This is not an end. It is a transfiguration. This was it, the final moment. Her free hand, shaking violently, dove into her pocket. Her fingers fumbled, closing around the smooth cylinder of a cigarette. She pulled it out, her thumb, finding the cap, popping it off. He didn't seem to notice, lost in the intoxicating proximity of his prize. With a final, guttural sob of desperation, Bryony drove the needle into her own thigh through the thick fabric of her pants. She jammed the plunger down with all her remaining strength. An explosion of fire erupted in her leg. The potassium chloride and warfarin concentrate flooded her system, a chemical inferno. The pain was immediate, breathtaking. It was a searing, white-hot agony that raced up her veins, making her vision swim and her stomach heave. Her entire body convulsed, a violent, involuntary shudder. Ryland noticed. He lifted his head, a flicker of confusion in his dark eyes. He saw the empty cigarette still clutched in her hand. A dawning, horrifying understanding crossed his face. But it was too late. His instincts, honed over centuries, had already taken over. His mouth opened, and his canines, long and hideously sharp, descended. The bite was not a romantic puncture. It was a savage, tearing violation. A blinding spike of pain shot from her neck through her entire nervous system. She felt the hot, wet pressure of his mouth, the scrape of teeth against bone. She felt a deep, pulling sensation, a ghastly vacuum as he began to draw her blood into himself. For 1 second, there was only the searing agony of her poisoned veins and the tearing pain in her neck. Then he ripped his mouth away with a choked, guttural scream. That was nothing like his calm, measured voice. He stumbled back, clutching his throat. Black, tar-like blood, her blood, mixed with his own unnatural saliva, spewed from his lips, splattering across the white floor. He coughed, a deep, retching sound, his body spasming. What did you do? He gasped, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked at her not as a prize, but as a vessel of contamination. The pain in her leg and neck was a roaring fire, but seeing him writhe in agony, gave her a surge of adrenaline that was its own kind of strength. She scrambled away from him, her legs threatening to buckle. Her eyes locked on the wreckage of the instrument tray. With a cry, she lunged for it, her hand closing around the heaviest piece of steel, the bent, solid stand. Ryland was on his knees, his body convulsing. His perfect, purified system was being ravaged from the inside. He was trying to rise, his unnatural strength fighting the chemical onslaught. He roared, a sound of pure rage and pain. and started to push himself up. Bryony didn't hesitate. She didn't aim for him. Fueled by the last dregs of her strength and a lifetime of stolen grief, she swung the heavy steel bar with everything she had. She aimed for the small, gray plastic panel on the wall. The impact was a detonation of sound. A crack of shattering plastic, a shower of sparks as the bar bit into the circuitry beneath. The green light on the panel flickered once, then died. For a moment, nothing happened. The only sounds were Ryland's ragged, choking breaths and her own gasping sobs. Then came a low, mechanical groan from the far side of the room. Slowly, inexorably, the heavy metal shutters over the reinforced window began to retract. A single, thin blade of gray pre-dawn light sliced into the operating theater. It fell across the tiled floor like a sword stroke. Ryland shrieked as if the light itself were acid. He recoiled, shielding his face. But it was too late. Where the sliver of light touched his hand, the skin smoked, blistering and blackening in an instant. The groan of the motors grew louder as the shutters opened wider. The slice of light became a wedge, then a floodgate. The pale, clean light of the rising sun poured into the room, banishing every shadow. It was blinding, merciless, absolute. It struck Ryland Crowe full in the chest. His scream was a sound that should not exist. It was the tearing of fabric and the shattering of glass, the shriek of a soul being ripped from its moorings. He didn't just burn. He unraveled. His tailored suit turned to ash, falling away to reveal the skin beneath, which was blistering, cracking, turning a brittle, incandescent gray. Smoke, thick and black and stinking of ozone and burnt meat, poured from his mouth, his eyes. He raised his hands as if to ward it off, but his fingers disintegrated into dust, blowing away in a thermal updraft only he could feel. His entire body became a column of crumbling, glowing embers, his form losing its integrity, collapsing in on itself. The scream died as his throat and lungs ceased to exist. In 5 seconds, it was over. Where a monster of impossible age and power had stood, there was only a pile of fine, gray ash on the floor, a dark smear where his clothes had been, and a few blackened fragments of what might have been bone. The pile settled, and a few stray motes danced in the sunbeams. Silence. The operating theater was flooded with the pure, clean gold of the new day. Bryony let the metal bar fall from her numb fingers. It clattered to the floor. The sound was huge in the sudden, absolute stillness. The fire in her veins was now a throbbing, sickening ache. The wound in her neck pulsed with a deep, hot pain. She slid down the wall, her legs giving out completely, and landed hard on the cold tile floor. She stared at the pile of ash. It seemed impossible. So small. So final. Her own breathing was a ragged, painful rasp in her ears. The world began to blur at the edges, the bright sunlight turning hazy. The door to the operating theater burst open, slamming against the wall. Torren stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He held a heavy fire extinguisher like a club. He took in the scene in an instant. The shattered control panel, the open shutters, the pile of ash, and her, slumped against the wall, blood staining the collar of her shirt. Bryony. His voice was a raw croak. He dropped the extinguisher and rushed to her side, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. "He's gone," she whispered, the words scraping her throat. "I know," Torren said, his voice thick with a relief so profound it bordered on collapse. His gaze went to her neck, his clinical instincts taking over. "Let me see." His fingers were gentle as he tilted her head. The touch was warm against her cold skin. He assessed the wound, his expression grim. Deep, but clean, somehow. No tearing. He looked at the empty surette on the floor, then back at her, a look of horrified awe on his face. "You did it. You poisoned yourself." Bryony just nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her head felt heavy, filled with cotton. She looked past him through the window. The sun was clearing the horizon now, a brilliant, burning star. The light caught the few remaining particles of Ryland's ash still suspended in the air. For a fleeting moment, they glittered in the